Regressamos agora para o último módulo do dia, dedicado às cidades. Para abordar a temática, recebemos Carlo Ratti, arquiteto, engenheiro e professor no MIT, reconhecido internacionalmente pelo seu trabalho em cidades inteligentes e inovação urbana, e curador da Bienal de Arquitetura de Veneza 2025. Para abordar a temática, recebemos Carlo Ratti, arquiteto, engenheiro e professor no MIT, reconhecido internacionalmente pelo seu trabalho em cidades inteligentes e inovação urbana e curador da Bienal de Arquitetura de Veneza 2025.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon. Bon dia, but sorry, I will speak English. Can you hear me? Yes. Now we have it. All right. Well, first of all, great pleasure to be here. I just arrived, so pardon me if I'm a little bit jet lagged. Can we see the slides? Yes, perfect. All right, so I want to share with you some, first of all, a few slides on the Venice Biennale, which I'm directing this year, but then a little bit on the work we're doing, mostly at MIT today. So some of the work we do is in design, is what we do in CRA. And then what we do at MIT is looking really at data and technology in order to better understand cities. Our main lab is in Boston. But also let me move this, but also we got a number of very small labs distributed in different cities with the idea that it's very important in what we do to get feedback from the cities, and also the research we do then can more easily go back to applications, to policy, to different type of application in the cities. So before that, I want to tell you a little bit about the Biennale, because we thought about the Biennale this year a little bit as a lab. And why as a lab? I think that the traditional way to think about a Biennale, the Venice Biennale is the first one in the end of the 19th century. Well, I think that is not really what we need today. The initial idea of the Biennale was a little bit like the World Expo, knowing about architecture globally, doing a selection, like an exhibition with the best of architecture globally. But now, you can look at things in real time as they happen. So I think that the Biennale should be more like a lab, a place to experiment with different things, instead of just a collection of what has already been done. And so the title this year is Intelligence, or Intelligenz is the Latin root between Italian and English. Usually you've got two names. At the Italian Venice Biennale, you've got Italian and English. Here you have one, but also we like the idea that gens or gens is about multiplicity, is about, in Latin, is about people, is about multiplicity of intelligence. My initial idea was actually to call this NI, natural intelligence, because when everybody thinks, I believe too much today about intelligence equals AI, or even something smaller like ChatGPT or LLMs, it's very important to see how, as architects, we can leverage all different types of intelligence in the work we do. So in the end, Intelligence Natural Artificial Collective is on until the end of November. The Biennale, as I was saying, we tried to build it a little bit as a lab. As you see, this is a diagram. It's a piece of work by Northeastern University, who actually looked at all the flaws in the conversations. And as a lab, also we want to have quite a bit of density of ideas, and also people coming from different disciplines. So we got over 750 participants. I got a slide for each of them, so bear with me. I'm joking. So I will just tell you a little bit of key data. Over 750 participants, 280 projects, 500 participants in interdisciplinary teams, 350 in multi-generational ones, 250 in women-led teams, especially very proud of that, especially in a discipline like ours that's traditionally rather biased, and over 375 in transnational teams. So how can we come together from different perspectives, different disciplines, in order to tackle some of the challenges we face, starting with adaptation? Here you see some of the images of the Arsenale, turned into kind of like a big lab, again with different people come together. And the way we design it, together with SAB in Berlin, I think it is an amazing job in turning this like into a fractal organism. You see it here into something that, again, where everything is connected with everything else. I'll show you a super quick video without spoiling too much about the effect of going through the Arsenale and through the Biennale. You see it here, the two key parameters at the beginning, climate, that you see there, and population. Climate and population is two key parameters for architecture tomorrow. And then you got the natural intelligence, learning from nature, from the logic of nature, both quite raw nature and more tame nature. And then you got the artificial. Artificial is about new materials, is about not only artificial intelligence, but also about sensors, actuators, networks. And then at the end you got collective, also with a big place for discussion at the Biennale. So in the middle of the Arsenale, you see in a moment, there's a big conversation space. Again, how architecture has been leveraging generation upon generation this idea of learning from each other and building together. So you see some of the other parts, this is still in the artificial one, and then we are entering in a moment the collective. Basic collective is learning over time and space from each other. And then also the outside, both in the Arsenale and in other parts of Venice, that becomes almost like a living lab. The same thing I was mentioning before, different things. This was about the request we got about doing a new way for Venice to connect to the water. And so in this case, Norman Foster with the chief designer of Porsche, with a lot of engineers, actually try to think about how, how to create new structures to connect the land with the water. So here you see a few of these kind of more smaller interventions, starting from a real practical problem and turning it into a design in the Giardini. All right, so that is just very briefly about the Biennale. I didn't want to tell you too much about it, not to spoil it. If you haven't seen it, it's open until the end of November. But I want to share with you some of the same thinking we apply in the research we do at MIT. And I'll start with research with data. That's a theme that was given to me today. And then, seeing at the end how we turn it into design as well. And I want to start with mobility. Well, in mobility, a long time ago, the Venice Biennale, this was 2006. In 2006, the position I have this year was by Ricky Burdett. He was the director of the Biennale that year. And that year we had a pavilion in the Biennale. Ricky invited us. And we had a pavilion. In that pavilion, for the first time, we actually looked at the city as a lab in terms of mobility. So that had never been done at the time. Today it happens every time you open your smartphone and you look at a Google map. But basically what we did was collect real-time data from the city. Data from cell phone, from anonymized data from cell phone, from the taxi system, from the bus system, and so on. So we got the data, we were sending it, this was 19 years ago, sending it to a proto cloud at MIT, and then we would send it back in real time to Italy. And we decided to focus on Rome, on the Italian capital, and send the data back to Venice. Now, that year, different things happened. I'll show you just a very special moment that summer, which is when Italy won the soccer World Cup. Italy and France were playing. You see here, through cell phone data, people moving here and there in the city of Rome. You see the Colosseum, the river. That's before the match. In a moment, the match begins, silence, nobody talks. France scores, Italy scores. Halftime, people make a quick call and move through the city. And then end of normal time, first overtime, second overtime, a famous headbutt by Zidane in a moment, by Zinedine Zidane, and finally Italy wins. And then you see everybody moving through the city and so on. So, as I was saying, that happens every single minute on our smartphones today. Some of the initial papers we did at the time are behind some of the technologies that were developed later, but somehow that was the first time ever that we took a big city and analyzed it. And when you get the data, you can understand a lot of things about the city. You can define what the city is. I'm showing some of the papers here, but feel free to, if you're interested, they are all on our website. You can download the full thing. We've been looking at this, and a very famous law developed by ZIP about cities. If you take two cities, it turns out there's something called gravity law applies to them. If you take Lisbon and Porto, and you want to look at the flows between them, then you can model them as population 1, population of Lisbon, population of Porto, divided by a distance, power alpha, where alpha is an exponent between 1 and 2. So that was well known, but actually using all this data, we could discover an extension to this very old and famous law, which actually an important thing is not only the distance, but also the frequency space. So how many times the same people move between the two cities? In this case, Porto and Lisbon. But you get this kind of beautiful law that we could discover this using the new data we could collect from cities. Or another thing that we discovered recently, together with colleagues in brain and cognitive science at MIT, is something that puzzled me since I was a student at Cambridge. When I was a student at Cambridge, UK, I was, for a while, staying there. That's the old house of Charles Darwin. And I realized something funny, that when I was going from that house to the department, at the time on Chaucer Road, I would follow probabilistically one route, and when I was going back, I was following a different route. And the reason that puzzled me is that, as you all know, the shortest path between two places is symmetrical. A to B equal B to A. So what was happening with my brain? My brain wasn't following shortest path. So that puzzled me. We tried for a few years to see if this was only myself or it was something we all do. And then recently, using similar type of data about mobility, we could actually look at this. That's a paper we did with colleagues, as I mentioned, in brain and cognitive science at MIT. And basically, our brain, like the brain of animals, follow actually vector-based navigation, not the shortest path. It is a little bit different. It's not too different. It's good enough. It's close to the shortest path. But when you do this, A to B, it's not always the same of B to A. And you can imagine actually in the savannah 30,000 years ago, some of our ancestors, the brain developing in a way that's interesting because this is much more easy to compute, the vector base, than shortest path. So you can imagine actually doing something that's not perfect but good enough and allowing some computational power to look at other things, other dangers in the savannah we might have had to deal with at the time. And so again, through data we can look at these type of things. And I think this is important because today we're merging more and more intelligence in our brain with intelligence in our pockets, with our smartphones, and so understanding the mechanism of our brain and the mechanism, the way we navigate space, also the way we enjoy architecture, and understanding how this can be coupled with different things, more and more, as I said, with different type of intelligence in the environment or in our smartphones, that becomes important to understand what the two logics are. We've been looking at other things, so this is like a design question. It's about, well, if you had to redesign New York by minimizing the fleet, what is the minimum fleet that allows us to take everybody to destination when they need to be there, just by optimizing dispatching? So that's actually real data in New York. That's all the taxis. You see the taxis are empty half of the time. And today, the taxis, you can either order a taxi or you just hail a taxi in the street. Now, if you just don't change anything but do better dispatching, matching demand and the offer of mobility, it turns out you can save a lot. And what you see here is actually the real data. That's mathematically we proved to get the absolute optimum, and just by rethinking how we match the two, you could cut down today over 8,000 taxis, cutting them down to a little over 5,000, exactly satisfying the same mobility. So some example of how data can help us to better understand how the city works, and that's a paper if you're interested mathematically, how the city works and actually how we can use it to better understand the system today and optimize it potentially. Or, look at other things. You all know this, that's a well-known traffic light, and traffic lights arrived on our roads when cars arrive on our roads. But if you got an intelligent system, you don't need to negotiate the intersection like we do today. Imagine a system that dynamically allows you to do something like this. Don't try it yet. And again, it becomes an interesting mathematical problem. It's like you in theory, so you see it here. We'll not get into the detail, but if you're interested in that, that's also a design problem. It's actually, how do we design a better way to negotiate things? I mean, it was a design problem 130 years ago to design the traffic light. It didn't exist before. It is a design problem, how we can rethink how we use the city today in different ways. And we've been using this in also in going into more technical design. There's a piece of design we did, architectural design, urban design we did with Google, actually with Google's sister company, with Waymo, and under Alphabet. And what you see here was, can you think about a street that in the morning is like this, and then at midday becomes like this? Or this is another similar thing that's actually the peripheric in Paris, the ring road in Paris. We won a competition for thinking about the peripheric in 2050. And in this case, again, can you rethink how this infrastructure can we develop in a way that is much more flexible and can be in this case, can be used in different ways over time, over space, also producing energy, or somehow to bridge better the two sides of Paris over time because it gets cleaner, less noisy, less dirty, and it can also become a place to rebuild across the city. So there was a small example. I started with mobility, but about how with mobility research and data can help us to get different dimensions of the city, and then we can all, as architects, as planners, turn it into design. If you look at society, we can also look at very interesting things. This is something I helped with the Biennale in Porto here in Matosinhos here a few years ago. And one of the things we did there for the first time was using all this data about mobility to look at segregation. We know that cities, since they begin over 10,000 years ago, is a beautiful place to bring us together. In a city is a way that together we can be more than each of us individually. When they emerge, again, our ancestors 10,000 years ago discovered this beautiful mechanism, again, to do more with less. At the same time, we also know that cities also tend to segregate, to have ghettos, places where actually people don't communicate. So there's a tension between the two. And here with data today, we can look at what with Richard Sennett, a colleague, and we teach together a class at MIT with Richard, we call liminal ghettos. So ghettos are not visible to the eye, to the human eye, but they can be seen through the lens of data. And these are some of the papers where we looked at data in order to really see what it is in kind of invisible fault lines in our cities that actually are the beginning of segregation. And of course, that's something as we started that a few years ago. We did it here in Porto. This is a paper in Nature Human Behavior we did a few months ago that actually combines, because that initial approach now has become a kind of a big line of research in urban planning, in using data to understand cities. So this paper is a recent review about all the different results as a community that we got into this space. But also we've been using it to look at the 15-minute city. 15-minute city, as you know, is a very well-known idea in planning. It emerged in Paris with Carlos Moreno and others during the pandemic. But again, with data, we can better understand it. Also realizing that if we push the 15-minute city too much, then we're segregating the city. We create a city where different neighborhoods don't talk anymore to each other. I'll finish with this section with another project that was kind of an experiment that was forced on us. It was forced on us because of COVID. Now, in the social sciences, when you look at the city, you always have a chicken and egg problem. In the city, you look at different variables, and you can look at correlation. But it's very difficult to get causation. You can never take a variable, remove it, and put it back. So look at the effect of a single variable on the system. Well, in the case of COVID, however, COVID did the experiment for us. In the case of COVID, we were just before COVID, a few months before, we started collecting data on the MIT campus about the network of the MIT campus. Anonymized data, you don't know who the people are, you don't know what they're exchanging, but you can actually look at the network. Nodes are the people, and links are connections, emails sent between people. And that was before COVID, and then COVID hits, and then on the 23rd of March 2020, the campus goes on lockdown. And then when it goes on lockdown, then you get the key parameter, the parameter we all deal with in this room, the parameter of architecture. The secret sauce of architecture is physical space, is removed, and then is put back into the system, into the equation. And what happens? So look at this. This is before COVID. If you just plot this simple visualization of the MIT network, just visualize. These are different type of algorithms based on springs that allow you to visualize the network. This is how it looks. So you see architecture, engineering, different departments, and how we all connect. And then you remove physical space, and then it looks like this. So it looks very, very different. So the question is, what happened? What changes when we just meet on Zoom and when we don't meet anymore in person, like today, or like in our streets, in our squares, and so on? So we started looking at all possible network science parameters. And you know what? All of them look the same before and after. Sorry. But then, at the end, we discovered one change. And the change is related to this. Now, this is only a definition. Think about the following. Think about all your friends. You can put them into two buckets, weak ties or strong ties. Strong ties are your friends who are also friends of your friends. So I know person A, I know person B, and A and B are also friends with each other. And then you call it strong tie, just a definition. Then you got weak ties, and weak ties are a person you know who's not a friend of your friends. So again, it doesn't matter how much you talk to them, you connect with them, it's only a definition. Some are part of your inner circle, friends of friends, and some are not. They become like bridges, as you see there in orange, to another community. So just with the definition was a famous paper. If any of you is familiar with sociology, it's probably one of the most famous papers in sociology in the past 50 years by a person called Margaret. At the time, he was a professor at Johns Hopkins University. Now he's at Stanford. But the point is, weak ties are very important. Weak ties, which are exactly what happens in a day like this, that you meet people who are not your friends or your friends, and then you get exposure to new ideas, to new thinking. You need to confront diversity in many different ways. So weak ties are usually very important because that's where creativity, new ideas, and so on come from. I mean, at this point, I think you got the gist of the story. So if you look at weak ties, when you remove physical space, they disappear. So on the MIT campus, when you remove weak ties, you see it there. That's the 23rd of March, 2020, the line. But it starts going down before because for a few weeks before, people were scared about COVID, so we all stopped going to campus. But on 23rd is really, it's a big line where you cannot go anymore. So if we remove physical space, then weak ties don't form anymore. And it is interesting. As I said, weak ties, there's tens of thousands of articles based on the initial Granovetter article showing how weak ties are so important for the well-being of our social networks. If you look at this, it's almost like a brain shrinking. That's the MIT again plotted. And as you remove weak ties, it looks like a brain shrinking. And then, again, and that's a paper, if you're interested, it's in Nature Computational Science. And that, led us to say, well, how do we look at other dimensions of this as well, the important physical space, and something we're doing right now. By the way, anybody knows what this is? No? So this is some video taken by a very interesting guy called William White. He was very well known in the 1970s and 80s, in the second half of the 20th century in the United States. And William White was the first one who actually looked at a lot of footage in public spaces in New York to really understand human interaction, social interaction. He was one of the key people actually who helped preserve Bryant Park next to New York Public Library. And basically his work was very influential at the time as understanding the usage of space. And he did this, and at the time in his books, he say, look, this is a super powerful method, but the problem is analyzing. Today, we got AI to analyze this, so we looked at how was public space used 50 years ago. We are looking at how it's being used today, more recent data, and we analyze this with AI. And if you're interested, we discover actually something quite interesting, which is again related to weak ties, how we interact, and also how this is changing over time. It looks like we are losing an important dimension of public space today because it's become a bit more transactional. We take our phones, we go and meet people, we meet online, but less as a place where we start new conversations. So another example of how we can look at this. There's a couple of papers. There's another paper also in PNAS. So we're also taking this into architecture. This is a new museum we designed in Milan. It's called Meet Museum. And here It was before it was, the old museum was designed by Gaolenti. You might know Gaolenti, who designed the Musée d'Orsay in Paris. And then we were asked to redesign it now. Now, Gaolenti had to do a lot of stairs because this museum is connecting two historic buildings with different levels. And so she added this kind of a huge amount of stairs, and we turned that like into a plaza. So we redid all the stairs and turned it into a place for people to meet. So you see it here, the name of the museum also is Meet, but basically to go, to try to favor the creation of weak ties, of new connections between people. So this is like a vertical plaza, an Italian plaza, but turned vertically where people can meet. This is the design of the new master plan for Milan Innovation District, the former Expo site. This is a project we did with Big, a skyscraper in Singapore, one of the tallest buildings in Singapore, where you see in the middle, there is a place again for people to meet with each other, and meet with nature. You know, nature kind of gets into the architecture, as you see here. Or in this place, which is the first extension of the master plan of Brasilia, you see there the first major extension of the historic master plan. You know the Oscar Niemeyer and Lucio Costa master plan. It looks, by the way, like an airplane landing in the Cerrado, in the savannah, in the middle of Brazil. Beautiful master plan. When you're there, I wrote a lot about this, you know, a number of things that are a bit suboptimal because it comes from an idea of planning based on dividing, on zoning, dividing all the different functions. And also, if you look at this, Brasilia has beautiful lakes, but the city doesn't engage with nature. So it's somehow this idea of an airplane landing, but without really starting from nature, just ignoring some of the nature that was there. At the same time, it's a beautiful, you know, it's a beautiful master plan. The monumental axis has some of the most amazing building of the 20th century, including Ichaparachi by Oscar Niemeyer. So if you're going there in this extension, what we did was taking the same dimensions, but turn them inside out. And actually, it's very similar. If you look at that, here the superquadra are very similar to the size of the superquadra in Barcelona, which are 3 times the original block by Cerdà. As you know, Barcelona was designed across the Cerdà block, and now the superquadra tend to put together 3 blocks in order to create a super block where actually you got more spaces for people, neighborhood activities, and this kind of, they fit into this 15-minute city idea. So what we did there was actually, it turns out that actually the 3 blocks are very similar to the original Lucio Costa, Oscar Niemeyer dimension. And we try to do that, but also turning it inside out with nature in the middle and buildings outside instead of what you have today. But again, you know, in the idea of how to promote connection, interaction with people, people with people, and people with nature. So again, you know, that about society. Very briefly about autonomy. Everybody is excited today about autonomous systems. We got autonomous systems everywhere in our homes. We got Roombas, autonomous, they clean our homes. The mayor of Amsterdam came to us a few years ago and was very excited about autonomy in the city. But then we said, you know, why autonomous cars in Amsterdam? You all know Amsterdam is a beautiful city with a lot of water in the middle. Not much asphalt, but a lot of water. And so we said, what about designing autonomous boats? So we call them rowboats. And then what can you do with that? You can use them to move things around, to move people around, to sense water quality, air quality, but also think about them like floating pixels. You can connect them to do a temporary bridge when you need it. You assemble and disassemble, or you can create a floating stage, or it becomes like a. Think about archigram on water. You can create your floating, your walking architecture that can do different things like that, which, by the way, is nothing new. Venice has been doing this once a year for hundreds of years during the Festa del Redentore, when the gondolas come together and create this kind of temporary bridge. So I want to share with you how we did it. This was done again at MIT, working with colleagues in computer science, with TU Delft and Wageningen University. You see here the little boats, different type of propulsion. This was the first small model, 1-4, all 3D printed. You see it here. Symmetrical, very flexible. Oops, sorry. Anyway. But then, again, this is about the theme I was given today, as I mentioned before, is about data. So this requires collecting a lot of new data in the city. So this is data that usually Google will collect in a normal city, but on the canals in Amsterdam you don't have it, so we had to collect all of this. And then, the data, what allows the system to navigate. So this is actually how a robot sees the environment. This is called LiDAR. The LiDAR is in every self-driving car, in every Roomba, you got the LiDAR. Every second you get 300,000 data points collected with an accuracy of a few millimeters. And that's like, what our brain does. Our brain looks at the environment and does a three-dimensional model to navigate, and usually a machine will do the same with a LiDAR like this. The interesting thing is that when you're doing this in all the canals, little by little you create a full updated map of the city. So you can use that map also for other things. It becomes a way to monitor the city in a very precise way. For instance, looking at a big problem in Amsterdam is about quay walls. Sometimes they fall. You can look at that. So you look at this, and then you insert this into a system, and you teach it how to navigate. That's the MIT swimming pool. That's what swimming pools are used for at MIT. And then you look at obstacles, and you can teach the system how to avoid obstacles. Even very complex obstacles, as you can see. That is Wei. Wei was promoted professor after this successful experiment. And you see here all the data and how the system actually navigates. So that is the research we've been doing. Here are some of the papers. You can look at them. I'll show you what we did, where we ended with research. Now it's a company selling robots for cities. Most cities, like Porto, are facing big bodies of water. So this can become a way to complement mobility on the ground with water mobility. And that's a little video where we finished research and handed it over to the company. Yeah. Quick, please. All right, so a final thing about, data also means we know much more about the urban environment. And so just a few examples. So cars are becoming like sensors on wheel. This is all the data that a car can collect, so thousands of sensors. And then you can use the car as a way to sense the city, or you can also use it in order to sense the infrastructure, such as bridges. Now, you've all seen this. This was a collapse of a bridge in Southern Europe a few years ago. Some of you might have seen this. Anybody knows what this is? Tacoma Bridge. If you've done civil engineering, you've seen this movie many times. The first bridge where we recorded the collapse, it was possible. Somebody went to film it, and all of the suspension bridges today are designed in a different way because of what was learned from the famous Tacoma Bridge failure, because all of the lower part has much more stiffness today. And the reason is that in this case it started resonating with the wind until when the bridge collapsed. This bridge is a bridge next to MIT. To the left is MIT campus. To the right, it's Boston downtown. That's Longfellow Bridge. I was walking on Longfellow Bridge a couple times a day until when they monitored it. They realized it was about to collapse. They had to rebuild it at a huge cost. And the reason is that today when you monitor a building or a bridge, the cost is very high. You can actually put sensors, as you see to the left. You can send people, as you see to the right, but basically a bridge today in the United States can be monitored at the cost of $500,000 per year. And so we'll never be able to monitor, it's too expensive, all the bridges in the country. So in this case, what you get from monitoring is something like you see here. It's usually vibrations. But we can now monitor vibrations with cars, with smartphones, or with professional sensors for vibrations. But every phone we have has accelerometers and gyroscopes. So we decided to monitor this bridge to see the question is, can we actually use all the data we all collect from smartphones in order to monitor infrastructure? We started with the Golden Gate because we know everything about the Golden Gate. You can say Golden Gate has perfect ground truth, so we can compare our data with the data that is collected by very precise instruments. We started going back and forth across the Golden Gate, as you see here. We did it like 100 times, and then the San Francisco police stopped us. They got very suspicious, moving this. And then it turns out, yes, the data you can collect can be easily turned, as you see here, in data that tells you how the bridge vibrates, and so you can actually monitor infrastructure with this. And what we've been doing in this paper, we scaled up with Uber, with data from Uber, but basically if you got data from an app, you could monitor all the bridges in Portugal with a rather small cost. Again, this is something that now we're bringing into with a startup, is being made accessible to many cities and countries. Or we've been looking at how to use existing fleets to monitor things. That's Cambridge, garbage trucks in Cambridge, and how we can use them in order to collect data about the environment. We call this city scanner, you see it here, different types of data, and how you collect through that, you can get a huge amount of information about the environment, a very high grain, as you see here. And also, I will not get into the details, but mathematically it's quite beautiful that you need very few cars. On the x-axis, you got the number of cars or trucks. On the y-axis, the percentage of segments you are scanning. You need very few of them to scan a lot of streets. In New York, with a few dozen vehicles, you can scan at least every street once a day in this case. Or something else we've been doing about looking at the environment, we've been using existing fiber for telecommunication, in this case in San Jose, in order to do the equivalent of what you do with geophysics, but in reverse. So to look at, you see it here, it's a paper from a few weeks ago, where actually you're able, with one fiber, to really look at all of the waste being generated in the city that can tell you a lot. Every car, what's happening, but basically is a way to better understand what happens in the city. Two final things. We also like to look at the dimensions of a city that usually are not really explored. For instance, waste. If you look at that computer, which is down there as well, today you know everything about it. Every chip in the computer, you know where it was produced, how it moved on the planet, how it became that machine. But then you use it, you sell it, at some point somebody will throw it away, and then you don't know anything about it anymore. Sometimes waste ends up where it shouldn't. And so we said, how can we look at this? And so we decided to develop a little chip to put on waste and start following waste. We started a number of years ago. I'll show you the first project now. But now we're working on a big deployment for the Olympics in 2026, next year, to really monitor with compostable tags, with sustainable tags, monitor thousands and thousands of objects and see what happens to waste during big events. But the first one was this, so we had to design the little tag. The little tag is like a miniature cell phone that actually needs to send very little information, but for a very long time, for a few months or even years. And that's a paper. If you're interested, we did the first deployment in Seattle, 500 people. Okay, a bit more volume is fine. Anything from banana peels to e-waste. And after tagging all of them, we started following them. So there's 3,000 objects. The day of deployment, after a few days, you see some of the main landfills next to Seattle. But actually, a big surprise, how far stuff started to travel. sometimes in crazy, unexpected way. Look at the trace went all the way to Chicago, changed its mind, and went back to California. And still moving after 1 month or 2 months. We could not think of a better piece of music than the Farewell Symphony. So anyway, you get this was the first experiment. Then, since then, we've been doing follow-up experiments. The big one will be next year for the Olympics, as I mentioned before. In this case, we focus only on e-waste globally. And we discover, look at the traces, some of them are legal, some of them are not. And we discover places in the middle of the jungle in different parts of the world where e-waste is illegally disposed of. Again, hopefully some of this has been fixed now. And then we also discovered something that we didn't expect. All of that also led to an exhibition at MoMA. And one day, what happened is that a burglar came to our lab at MIT. And this poor guy stole a lot of things in our lab, computer and so on, but also stole some of the stuff that tells you where it goes. And this is what happened. All right, I will stop here. Thank you. And again, just 2 takeaways. Well, first of all, if you haven't been yet, come to Venice and let me know. I'll give you a tour of the Biennale. And the second thing was just to show you data can be quite cool in cities, can help us a lot to understand cities, and then understanding is the beginning of design.
Para esta mesa redonda juntam-se Joaquim Santiago, José Lameiras e Teresa Cálice, com moderação de Andreia Garcia.
Okay, yes. It's all good. Okay, so good afternoon and welcome to this last panel of Shift. Here at Casa da Arquitectura, my name is Andrea Garcia and it's a pleasure to be with you. So before we begin, a big thank to everyone that joined us in this room, to Casa da Arquitectura, Nuno Sampaio and his amazing team, for hosting, and in particular José Pedro Sousa for the clarity of his vision in shaping today's conversations during this morning and afternoon. What an amazing opportunity for all of us. So our session is titled City Plus, and the plus is a simple idea, what each of us adds to help cities become generally regenerative. So nature plus people plus technology plus governance plus education working all together. So we'll hear different skills and tools from neighborhood streets to major infrastructure, from municipality delivered to data-driven sensing, and from classroom to city hall. Just to explain a little bit, so we start already with these 30, a little bit more, but amazing minutes of Carlo Ratti as a keynote. And now we'll follow by 3 personal lightning introductions by Joaquim Santiago, by José Lameiras, and by Teresa Calix in the first person. So I give the stage to Joaquim first.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with this such a panel today. My name is Joaquim Santiago. I am an architect from Lecu Studio in Barcelona, and I will try to explain 5 concepts, ideas that we find interesting in our studio when talking about urban regeneration and urban projects. I will start with the idea of being experimental. It's quite a constant in our urban design work. Actually, it is a way for us to try to think out of the box and, let's say, to explore the limits of urban regulations and rules that are a lot in the case of the city of Barcelona in terms of trying to design and transform the public space. So this is an important dimension we develop in our office. This is one of our projects. It was a temporary intervention that was looking for thinking further, opening the public space and the streets to new ideas and ways of reclaiming them for the people. The idea was to think or to offer the people a new support in which they could, yes, maybe we can move forward, because we like being experimental, but not so much. So, yes, some pictures about this. Moving? Not now. Okay. Well, the idea of this intervention that took place in Sant Antoni was to create a, let's say, one-to-one scale model in which we could see different ways of performance of people in the public space of Barcelona, in the core of the Eixample of Barcelona, which was a space in which intervening was quite difficult. We like this idea of introducing the dimension of empathy in public space as a way of understanding that knowing and really understanding the needs of people and the neighborhoods and the neighbors is so relevant, and that's why also the idea of ambiguity or being ambiguous with our designs and urban elements really allow us to create this kind of new narratives of public space, to understand that maybe unexpected or unplanned situations, daily life scenes could happen that there are not previously prefixed. So this is, for example, the case of a small intervention when this was a playable sports circuit in Parallel in Tres Chimeneias, where previously we had a wall, we were creating a bench, a long bench that was used for a table, introducing a new energy to the space. So this idea of being certainly ambiguity for opening opportunities of the spaces. Well, we all know about, we have already talked about climate, so it is also an important idea of how to refresh our cities and the strategies in terms of creating also new streetscapes that permit us to introduce much more organic solutions in terms of a basement, the soil, how to manage the water and create a better places also for trees, about materials, about textures, about the surfaces that provide us new solutions. And in this sense, nature as a tool to manage and to create this kind of, those are projects for Reus and for Barcelona in which we are trying different solutions for, let's say, more refreshing environments in the surroundings and the playgrounds of the schools where the most vulnerable people is. And well, in this sense, the idea of projects, the regeneration projects or the regenerative city as a complex concept in which the idea of hybridating and introducing all the previous levels, but also much more is relevant in terms of looking for a positive complexity in terms of these urban projects. Those are some of the concepts are important in our office when dealing with public space projects, and well, we will have time to talk about them in the following talk. Thank you.
Yeah. You can go for it, I think.
Okay, I was born as a hyperactive, so allow me to stand. Can I just ask you to change the presentation? I always introduce myself as the person that has the best job in the world because I'm a landscape architect. I get to do design practice and I get to do research on design practice. And one of the things that I really like is that as a professor, I always tell the students that we should always contribute to the redesign of the city where we are. So as João Pedro introduced when he spoke about me, this is what I love doing. I love to think and redesign the city, but the city from the green structure, which is also the social structure and the ecological structure. And that's a little bit of what we have been doing. So I'd like to thank the invitation to Casa da Arquitectura in the person of Arquitect Nuno, and also congratulate João Pedro for the amazing team that he has set in here. I was fortunate enough to be also father of 3 kids, so I know a lot about how to think and design the city from the children's perspective, but also make the essay of trying to drive a pram with twins along the city, and you will know a lot about how to design for accessibility. I was fortunate enough to have lived and worked in Copenhagen and being involved in amazing redesign of big urban parks. For example, João Kerk showed the Superkielen. My office, GHB, made the park that leads to Superkielen, so I was fortunate enough to have had that experience of thinking and designing from a people-first perspective. For example, with the redesign of an amazing healing garden called Nacadia, which is in Copenhagen, which is funded by the Danish health system and which is 5 times more effective than the use of medicine, for example. So this is a little bit of my experience that I was fortunate enough to bring to Porto. And one of the things that I always show in my presentations, which is kind of my mantra, and it's very aligned with the work that King Jong-il did throughout his life, and I was very happy that Nuno mentioned him, which is let's all make sure that we make our cities more permeable. And this is kind of the driving force of all the projects that I'm going to show you, because we have been thinking and contributing to the city of Porto through floodable parks and through mapping the green structure. And one of the key things that you should all strive for, we should not just plant more trees. We have to make sure that whenever we think and design the city, that we allow for permeability and for all of the water to go into the ground. Because most people don't know the largest aquifer the largest water body that we have is the underground. It's the soil. It's not lakes or rivers, it's the soil. And the thing is that trees act as factories that are able to take the water from the water tables and put it into the atmosphere, and it's this evapotranspiration of water into the atmosphere that creates this thin layer of moist, which is what contributes to the effective cooling of a city. This is for me to say that the biggest problem that cities face today, and the work that we're doing in Porto, is to try to reverse this, to increase the permeability of Porto. And this is so important that we have people in here from Barcelona. In Barcelona we had 1,000 days of drought, and because the water tables are so low, the trees are dying, and you have areas of the city that have trees that have the same thermal behavior as pavements. So it's not enough to just have trees, we need to also have healthy water bodies. And that's the driving force of everything that we have done so far. This is the first mapping that we did of Porto. Almost 15 years ago, we mapped the green structure of Porto. This allowed us to identify which areas of Porto need to have a further increase in green areas, how they connect, how people move, because this is also the social structure. But one of the main exercises that I always ask people to do is imagine the city of Porto if you push all of the buildings towards one side and the green spaces to the other. This is the city of Porto. So, and this is a shocking image. The image that tells us that almost 50% of our road, which is the same everywhere, is dedicated to cars and pavements, also sidewalks, but mainly cars and pavements. And that's why we have been studying the thermal behavior of the city. That's why we made lots of floodable parks. These parks are most well known outside Portugal. The European Commission every week sends a team in here to make the visits to the parks. But these are parks that are designed to infiltrate 100% of the water into the ground and to make sure that they contribute to the climate resilience of the city. Because if you flood in a controlled way the urban parks, you protect the cities. And we have demonstration that it worked. 4 times last year, the parks were flooded. And because they were flooded, the university campus is protected. But we got further and further. This is just an image of the parks working. We went further with the Ashpegala campus, University Campus Park, where we devised a park that could be flooded with 2.6 meters of water, thus protecting the metro, the oncology center, and other urban areas. And this is exactly how we designed it, how we approach it, and reality has shown us that what was planned as an extreme weather event that might only happen once every 50 years already happened in the city of Porto. So just to show the next project, we are working on the next climate resilient urban park in Salgueiros, where we're making tests on the new urban ecology, because if the water tables keep on getting lower, lots of trees will die. So we have to plan for the new trees that will help the city to endure and to have an effective cooling. So that's why we're making these laboratories to test the next 50 years of the city. Even this year, a very heavily rainy intensive year, we have such a low water tables that in our botanical garden, lots of trees are dying. We also made the tree planting plan for the city of Porto, also for the city of Matosinhos, where we identified 200 kilometers of streets in the city that could be planted with trees. And most recently, I'm going to pass this. This is just a work we did with the students for redesigning the oncology. But most recently, we also thought of the biggest problem that the city faces, which is a regional highway that's intersecting the city, that's segregating the outside and the inside of the city. And we have devised and proposed new mobility strategies where, using the same dimension, we can now move 10 times more people, and we can create a large green structure ring around the city that effectively cools down the city. In the process, we're going to create an alternative for the mobility of the city. We also use lots of big data to support all of the proposals that we have made. And we made a custom tailored solution to take this. I call this image the spaghetti, and you can of course understand why I call it the spaghetti. It's a car-centric city. It's a car-designed city. And of course, the most obvious solution is to connect segregated communities. We start here, but at the same time, we also address the big mobility problem, because we need to find ways to move more people in an alternative and sustainable way. And this is just a little bit of what we have been doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, now you're listening. I'm Teresa Callis. I come from the Faculty of Architecture of the University of Porto. I was just waiting for the presentation to appear in, let's see, because I start with a question, so, okay.
Yes.
So, Well, I knew that Carlo Ratti would talk us about data, that we would have a lot of projects before. So I thought to bring this question of how can the university contribute to encouraging actors to deliver better design by engaging with people's needs. So the idea was, of course, thinking of people's needs in this broader sense that's beyond what people know that they need, but also much more than that, because we know that presently there are a lot of things that are still that we believe that people need, but people still don't have that awareness about those necessities. So I've been working for a lot of years in urban design, what in Portuguese we would say projeto urbano, because I think it has a broader amplitude relating to, because it's also strategical thinking, also programming, also collecting data, and then having an idea of what the existence of a particular territory or a particular society, and how can we relate with this case study, and then present a way of transforming it. And so one of the things that I've been noticing from, 20 years, is that the students change the ideas that we thought that were very important in the 90s when I was studying, or the things that we can relate as being the most important things to introduce in a city, are completely different. So I think the present generation is quite interested in regenerating the city. So, and it's a pity that Barbara Miranda I think it's not here, but I have to recall that she brought this in the previous round table, this idea that we need to introduce these matters in the School of Architecture. And I can say that since 2020, there's a theoretical course. It's just one semester where I try a lot to raise awareness on these topics. Of course, after that, they only have one design studio, so it's their opportunity to integrate in the project, and somehow I feel that it really works, because I can understand that I talk a lot about nature-based solutions, about something that it's quite new, I would say, to architects, because we talk a lot about linear time, but now they also introduce in their project the circular time, or the time of the different moments of the year. How can we relate with springtime, wintertime, and how it changes, or how can we introduce in our design also that those characteristics. So this, of course, it's quite related with something that I'm very engaged with, and was also brought in the previous roundtable, that is this idea of the Nebugo South program that, of course, tries to answer this call of the New European Bauhaus. And of course, there's this, Barbara brought this question that, of course, we have to look at Europe as a whole, but we really believe that things or solutions, or the way we look at things, change considering the particular territory where we are. And of course, there are topics that are transversal, but at the end, we have to consider that probably we have in the South a lot of opportunity, or some characteristics that change the way we understand reality, and also change the solutions that make sense. And this is quite interesting. We've been doing this for also since 2020, and somehow the two things relate, because it was also this relation with the European Bauhaus and the call from the students that create these two opportunities in parallel. So the truth is that we've been discussing a lot of a lot of different topics that go from the landscape to the question of housing, to zero kilometers architecture, geo-biosourced materials. So somehow considering the schools that are engaged in this particular project, it's true that we've been creating more and more awareness in people. And getting back to the beginning of my presentation, what I feel is that people need to quite the focus that we must face, that we must understand. And even through this project, we almost had 200 people actively participating in 7 events that went through a series of different topics. And almost 20 students, teachers, decision makers, and citizens were involved in 5 BIPs that we already, blended intensive programs that we've already achieved in 4 different countries. And in a way, I think it's a way, or these are opportunities that the university is able to create. And at the end, of course, we start with our students, we start with architects, but at the end, we believe that we are actually changing or creating opportunities to change the mindset of our society. Thank you.
So thank you all. I will invite you or challenge you to go a little bit to the beginning of this round table, or even before that. So let's start or go back to visit the keynote presentation of Carlo Ratti. And I will start by asking you directly, what in fact for you, of course, is the most tangible benefit or the most serious risk when data and technology are used in the name of urban regeneration? And
No.
It will work.
Hello? No?
it's coming. Yes.
All right. Yes. Yes, even too much now. No, so look, by the way, I was given the theme of data, so that's what I talked about, but I think we could talk, I think one of the exciting things we just heard is, which is a lot in the Biennale this year, is about how small intervention can lead to something longer term, working on scale, like nature does, learning both from the point of view of engaging people in the city and also from the point of view of working with nature in order to plan for things over time. So what I want to say is that let's not just get stuck on data. I did it because this was the topic that was given to me. Going back to your question, data means knowledge. So for instance, I was excited when here in Matosinhos, a few years ago during the Biennale in Porto, we looked at data to see these liminal ghettos. I didn't get into much detail, but that was about really looking at communities, looking at how this kind of invisible fault line, that segregate our cities. So this is one example. There's, I don't want to repeat the others, there's many. In terms of risk, there's huge risks. I think the risks today, however, are not in the city. In the city, the data we're using is all public data, if possible, open data, and not really intrusive. But if you look at the space of risk, the risk is humongous today. And the reason is that we got data that's collected in a way that's not even well known to us. Our phones collect thousands of data points every day. We don't really know where they go. And the data is used to train AI. By the way, there's no AI without data. You got the most sophisticated AI brain you can imagine. If there's no data to train it, it's like an empty brain. So, basically data trains AI, but I believe that we should all fight in order to make sure that we know how these systems, everybody calls this system like black boxes. The reason is that we don't know exactly how they behave. You train it with something, and then we'll keep on doing that, whatever type of system you're using. And I think today there's too much opacity. So yes, I think there's a lot of risk in that, in the fact we don't know how things are trained. The data is, we don't know enough about the data that's collected. But I think that problem is in our pockets. Is not, luckily, is not much in the city, or at least is not in the city, in the data we were looking at before. But certainly, that's a big battle of democracy. We should all pay a lot of attention. I think having black boxes trained in an opaque way, well, is very risky.
Yeah, and taking actually that comment that is also a provocation, a pertinent provocation, I will ask you if you want to comment in the way this somehow resonate for you, if there is something not just from the presentation but also from this provocation connected with your specificities that you want to actually comment.
Yes, well, I can start by saying that the research, the works are amazing, and in terms of understanding from our point of view and our studio, we are really interested in understanding the behavior of people. And the research and the idea of how the performance of people in public space has changed along the last decades, for us as designers is such a relevant information to really have a vision of how this evolution, how the tendencies in terms of if people really stays on the, or is in the public space, or is just moving from one point to another. This is an evidence, no? We are really seeing, and it is also, streets are much more than spaces for mobility, no? We think that there is a huge potential in terms of the transformation of public spaces, also in green infrastructure, but in social infrastructure. No? And that's why understanding this evolution could show us also a reality of, let's say, more individualistic society, and to let's fight against this reality. We can design in terms of creating streets that reclaim new uses, open new platforms, new ways of understanding the road or the street as a place for play, for bringing people together. And that's why the research are for us, so interesting, and then applying them as temporary pilots in the streets and observing these kind of evidences are part of our main interests also. So yeah.
Well, data is clearly the new currency. So we know that data now is more available than gold, and that's a fact. But we also know that we as designers, we are extremely biased by our preconceptions. So in that sense, data is absolutely fundamental. And I, as a designer, for example, whenever we do have a tendency to think and design the world as if it was going to be seen from above. We think that we know that how people are going to use the space, and if we tell people how they should use the space, that they're actually going to use it in that way. And then data proves us that we're wrong. So in that sense, it's extremely important to have data to actually match that bias. Actually, about data, which is the first time I went to Beijing, I took an image of the global heat map, and I told them, look, this is a platform that you can use to see how people behave from a sports perspective. And they asked me, why do you need that? And I said, well, because you get information about people. And they said, well, but we have all of the data on cell phones. It's publicly available, and you can use it, so you just need to make good questions. So the question about data and the question about the access to data, it's more about making good questions. And we, as designers, we do have a tremendous bias. One of the biggest bias that we have is about how we perceive the world. We still have a tendency, I love maps, I'm a huge fan of maps. I love making diagrams. And when I started my career, I started making designs the same way as a landscape architect does a design, which is on a plan. And then I went to the things that I designed and I hated them. And that's because I realized that I think I know about abstraction. I know how the space is going from eye level, but nothing matches the experience of eye level. That's why now we're using, for example, VR. We're trying to put our students to think more at the experience of eye level. So the way I think that things will evolve, of course, is that we will have data to try to show us what our biases are hiding from us, but we will need to have more and more and more user experience and the eye-level experience.
I totally agree that, in fact, without data, we wouldn't have any knowledge about anything at the end. And I think that in this moment that we are thinking about regenerating cities, more and more we must consider to measure things that are less obvious. Of course, I'm again thinking about architects and architects that are designing cities, and we are used to look at buildings, to look at public space, density. Well, we are very familiar with all those measures, but at the end, for instance, we should look at the invisible water that's below the surface of our cities. How can we work with those elements that will make all difference, like José Miguel was explaining in his presentation? How can we look at water, the visible one, the invisible one? How can we deal and consider this particular element in our design? So at the end, I think, of course, we need to introduce a lot of different layers that are, at least in the past, weren't part of our laboratory, but now start to make sense. And most of the times we need to look at those less obvious materials, less obvious information, but at the end I found quite interesting that moving from objects, the waste, and this is also part of our design of architects. We never think about waste, but of course it is a very important part of the way we live in the cities.
Mm-hmm. So
maybe just I agree with a lot of what has been said, and there's one aspect that I think, nature has been developing incredible, I don't want to say designs, but somehow, but nature works. But what you see in evolution is you try something, and then you get feedback. And I think one of the key things that breaks down, if any of you have seen, there's a beautiful book, 1970s book called Architecture Without Architects. And, any of you has seen that book, Rudolsky. By the way, Rudolsky had operated also in Spain. There's still a house by him next to Malaga. And the key thing that breaks down between architecture without architects, the vernacular, and today is really a lot of that feedback loop. So, which is more like what happens with nature. In vernacular architecture, think about in informal cities today, you still have the same thing. You try something, and then if it works, people will replicate and so on. And I like the way some of you believe that basically data can help us to bring back some of it, because I think the key problem with the modernism is that we break that feedback loop, and we don't learn from mistakes, and also we don't learn from things that are successful, because we think that copying something good is not good, and then we also don't want to learn from our mistakes. So I think data is one of the methods. We can go back to some of the things that, again, Rudolsky, but we can also talk about Christopher Alexander, but all the people who looked at this architecture without architects, the strength of it was in that feedback, and data is one way to bring it back.
For sure, thank you. Going back to this idea of foundations and focus that we previously talked a little bit, so and connected with this idea of feedback, so what changes and for whom also? So I'm jumping to you now. So at neighborhood scale, let's say, because city scale sometimes is very abstract, no? We are comparing the uncomparable. So talking about the neighborhood scale, what changed most concretely for daily life in the places where actually you have been working? So you talk a lot about the layer of experimental empathy, the refresh, the evaporize, and then also the ambiguous dimension. So thinking that you are very sensible to the key aspect, it is the society or the social, aspect. What is in fact, what changed the most in the life of those places?
Well, I will talk about the projects we have had the opportunity of developing in Barcelona. One for us really relevant was the temporary interventions of the superblocks that show us a lot. We have the office close to this space. We live next to the neighborhood, so the research or the observation we did about all the urban ergonomies during these 7 years of intervention was really interesting to really understand how some of the ideas we previously had maybe had happened or not, but another, this idea of the unexpected really was, during the COVID, the space of the superblock, the central space become a hub of chess play, because all the clubs of chess were closed. Or the central space of this plaza suddenly became a space where children play, dance, elderly came, people was also bringing their food for having dinner in the plaza. So there was a hidden social dimension in the neighborhood that had no place for develop these scenes, and we started unveiling them. And these, let's say, quite viral images of the space, with this vibrant and diverse society, we had people not only from San Antonio, but also from the Raval, with a much more, let's say, vulnerable situation, sharing the space together. So this kind of a mixture was relevant for not only for us as designers, but also for the politicians to see how what a street could arrive to be in the future in Barcelona, no? And this really impulsed and scale up the project of pedestrianization. I am talking about superblocks. It's the, let's say, a slogan, no? But in the end, it's about the principles of understanding how these streets can be and could be, no? And we are also trying to change the standards of the city council, that sometimes they have rules from, let's say, decades, and they cannot see further, no? So opening spaces, and that's why I was talking also about the ambiguity, no? About this idea of opening for the unexpected, which is not something that politicians like because of the risks, but opening spaces for the spontaneous actions and ways of inhabiting them really opens innovation and ways of designing in another way our streets, no? We really think that nowadays we still have quite boring streets in our cities. The 90% of the streets are for cars mainly, and the designs are, let's say, quite the same. So adding complexity, adding diversity, and adding empathy to this kind of designs is quite one of our ideas of the studio.
Actually, I will take this idea of the hidden layer and make it visible that you talk, and then go to José, because he also, in his presentation, he talked about the visible aspects and invisible layers. So I think there is here something that we can go forward together. So, well, we could, of course, talk about and see this through the example of VCI as an example, of course, but actually, well, of course, because in fact, everyone knows that needs intervention and you are working on that, but maybe that question could raise in all your projects or the ones you want to call attention to or to highlight. But what is the first decision that unlocks the real transformation? And by that I mean, what is and of course each project is its project, we know, but there should be some common thing to highlight the hidden layers. What is the common layer that is hidden?
Okay. Before a very important question, let me just reinforce what Carlo mentioned about the feedback loop. The feedback loop is absolutely essential in any design. And nowadays we have data that finally allows us to do something that we have been dreaming of for the past years, which is evidence-based design. We want to make designs that's based on good data and that we can have information that helps us make good decisions. Why do I say this? Because we tend to make mistakes. Designers make mistakes, urban planners make mistakes. And if we know about that, we should learn from our mistakes for the next projects, but not just for the next projects. We still tend to see a design as something that's fixed. So we make a new urban park, we make a new building, and we don't learn in the process of the or in the post-construction. And one of the projects where I have worked on in Denmark, it was expected that for 10 to 20 years, the landscape architect could still follow up on the design of the project and fix the area. And this is important because if you make an urban park and the playground, you should fix it the construction or after the construction. You don't need it for it to be vandalized until you make a new design. So we should constantly be updating and be improving our designs because this is something that would make a big difference. And if we find something that does not work, for example, the metro bus in Porto, then we should go back and have the courage to stop it in the middle of the process because that's why the feedback loop is important. Porto has made one of the biggest mistakes ever.
By the way, I missed what is the thing that we should discontinue? In Porto?
Metrobus.
Metrobus.
Okay.
It's a bus that has the name of a metro.
But you know, it's okay to make mistakes. Nature,
yes,
because
exactly.
Nature works randomly, makes the majority of mistakes. You know, but I think what we are lacking as designers is a way to tell what is good and what works, what doesn't work, and data can help us.
Yeah.
There's another thing that can help us is what Hemingway used to call the bullshit detector. To understand, you know, what is bullshit and what is not bullshit.
Yeah. No, as for the hidden layer, but this is to say that I fully agree. We don't learn from our mistakes and we don't learn from our successes, and we should, in the process of designing something, follow it up and have the courage to say, I did something wrong and reverse it. The hidden layer, for example, in the case of VC, for me it's very, very simple what the hidden layer is, the social maturity. When I presented the project, I was fully aware that we do not have currently the maturity for such a project. And that's why it's so important that the project happens now, because we need to create that maturity. We need to show the project to people so that most people say, no way I'm going to give up my car. I want my car. That's for the others to give up the car. But if you start showing up something, if you start telling the people that an alternative is going to be created and that alternative is healthier for you, for your children, for the city, then something can start happening. Boulevard Périphérique is a very good example. Boulevard Périphérique, it's much larger than VC, and they already started the social engagement and the social activations, and they will make the transformation. But we know, for example, in Antwerp, they're also covering up their highway and reconfiguring their highway, and it's a process that started almost 20 years ago, and nowadays they're doing it by patches, so they're doing it step by step, and nowadays what's happening is that they make the first stretch, same as the super blocks, people see the benefits of it, and then the neighbors ask for something alike. So there is a huge social engagement, and it's people that are deciding on the next phasing of their highway reconversion. We know that in Porto, we cannot have a regional highway crossing the city that's fully clogged, that creates a tremendous pollution and a tremendous noise, and people don't have an alternative. So let's create the alternative and then let's teach the city. But we need to make the social activation. So in this project, it's case by case. The reason why we sent it outside was to create the social maturity so that 10 years from now we can start working on it.
Okay, Teresa, representing here both FAUP and New European Bauhaus Go South. And again, trying to connect this with the idea of shifts and changes. How can, because here in this panel you present the education, and there was this, in the previous one, the provocation of Barbara that you pointed out also here. So actually, I would like to listen a little bit more about how can education be more this agent of change that we so much are in need.
Well, I really believe that education is an important part, considering, of course, the students in first place. But as I was explaining, somehow I feel that this, for instance, this generation of students are asking us to give them the opportunity to have this knowledge that they believe they need to change how we looked at cities. So it's quite easy. It's quite easy because they are already ahead of us somehow. But probably I would bring some this concept of the lab that Carlo also mentioned. What I believe is that they, through these experimental labs that we create the opportunities to students to address different topics, different layers, but also to socially engage with citizens, with decision makers. In fact, these are opportunities to test some ideas, to introduce somehow in an academic environment some debates that will be much more harder to introduce in real life, but somehow they create the seed for what could be constructed next. And we understand that also when we relate with people outside of the university, there are some things that are changing. People, some of them are more available to understand what we bring. One of the things that I believe that works very, and I try to introduce in my design studio, is the relation between students and the municipalities, where they are working on a particular case study, and that creates a reflection which is very positive, because nobody is expecting anything from the other part, so they are just doing that for having a mark at the end, and the people from the municipality isn't expecting something to materialize. So at the end, the debate is very free, is very constructive, and even if the projects at the end are not completely reasonable, considering the present reality or even the budget or something like that, at the end they create a seed of opportunities that might be considered in the real projects, in the really in the real part of the work that most of those technicians in the municipalities produce in their daily life. So I think that's something that we can bring from the university. It's this free relation with the exterior world that gives also the opportunity to students to understand a little bit more of what they will face after finishing.
So it's a win-win situation.
Yes.
And taking that as an idea to drive us for the next block, so gains, compromises, and conflicts. Let's talk about what we gain versus what we accept to lose. And again, going back to you, actually, how do you prevent green gentrification as quality of green spaces?
Yes, this is actually, we were talking before about the experiences, for example, in Barcelona when redoing the green axis, no? Suddenly the axis have become so successful that all the housing surrounding has increased the prices. So this also happened in the super block of San Antonio. And we need to understand that, I mean, urbanism and intervention urban design needs to have together, let's say, political measures in terms of balancing the improves of the public space with some kind of controls of, for example, the terraces. When we were doing the interventions of San Antonio, the municipality at the same time was not giving more licenses for terraces, so it is a balance. I mean, we cannot stop transforming the cities. We need to improve them. We need to introduce green. Green makes the streets more comfortable and the neighborhood much better, and this could provoke this kind of problems. No? So for that, it's not just about designing a project, but also about the plans. That's why we sometimes think we explain that we prefer to talk about processes than projects. No, when talking about regeneration, it's more about processes in which not only the architectural project is there, but also another measures. Starting, for example, for the participatory processes, from these spaces for creating consensus, for creating pilots. So it is more about understanding it like, let's say, a progressive process in which multi-layer dimensions are together in the transformation. No?
Mm-hmm. But the provocation was also connected with this idea of let's call it what it is. So in this capitalism world where the green space is not for all, or it's almost not for all. So it's like, what kind of strategies can we use to prevent that? Of course, this goes back to the other topic, that is policies and policies making, and how can we use our tools and our projects in order to, or our privilege, in order to actually create some sense of sensitivity or awareness for these topics.
Yeah, that's why we were saying, or I was saying before about the street as a social infrastructure. No? We understand that the street needs to introduce green and to extend it to the whole city, but the social infrastructure needs to go together with this. And it's not just to open space for the green, but also to open the space for social uses and link them to the facilities, the local facilities, and create a decentralized structure in the city that can arrive to the whole neighborhood. No? We truly believe there are beautiful plans about Barcelona's markets and neighborhoods that are long ago, and really explain how the structure of the city is a distributed, polycentric structure in which the markets were social space for interacting. No? Streets is the network that needs to create the whole structure of the city, introducing not just, as we said, mobility, but also green, but also social into the public space. And actually, we do believe that reclaiming public space as a strategy for creating a much more resilient city is important, because in the end, we have had floods, fights, the COVID, and who was taking care of our elderly people, who was taking care about the neighbors. It is about creating this kind of vehicles between us that in this, as you say, in this evolution of the society, we tend to go more to an individualistic position. No? And we saw it in our streets. In Barcelona was the case, in which when you suddenly open a space or you create a plaza, an interior space for you start seeing how these vehicles are unveiling and are happening. But if not, it seems that each of us goes individually from along the street, along the cities.
I just took now awareness of myself about the time, and time flying for sure. I have a lot of things, a lot of blogs still to pick, but before that, let's try to open to the public if someone wants to ask something special. Okay, we have there.
I live in Barcelona. No, just for fun. I mean, Conseil de Descent is wonderful. Everything that has been pedestrianized is wonderful. But it's also not scalable, right? It's also like the traffic in Barcelona is a nightmare. My parents had 2 cars. I have 1 car. Yes, it's electric. I'm not going to give away my car. Neither will many, right? So, and to leave Barcelona, to get into Barcelona, or to commute in Barcelona is a nightmare, right? So I think, and it is true that Conseil de Descent in the morning, I don't want to do anything else than to bike down and go through Conseil de Descent, because then it's silence. It's like a noise cancellation in the most wonderful morning possible and start of the day. But of course, any of those ideas needs to have a parallel to respond for infrastructure, because we cannot cook tomorrow without the ingredients of today. And I think the cars are and will always be, personal mobility will always be an ingredient, right? And I think within these conversations, what is that balance? So that's the question in general, right? Because of course, pedestrian, human-centric focus is paramount, but infrastructure for thousands and hundreds of thousands is still, for commuting hundreds of thousands is still relevant. And we cannot transit without actually having a response for that.
Okay, now, yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, I think that I was focusing on, let's say, people-centric streets, because currently the balance is completely, I mean, nonsense, no? So now we have to do for this. I mean, we are not going to remove cars. Cars must be in the city. And Barcelona has a lot to do in public transport. I mean, they have to do with train, they have to work with the tranvía. Now they are trying to connect the tranvía from one point to the other. I mean, the network of biking also needs to be improved. There are a lot of parallel measures to be taken into account in terms of implementing these kind of measures. No? But I think that currently we live, I mean, completely unbalanced. Some years ago, if you wanted to go from Eixample Esquerra to Poblenou in an horizontal way walking, it was impossible. You should cross Plaza Catalunya, which was impossible, or go through the Gothic, and now you take Conseil de Descent, and it's amazing to do this, to have this experience, no? That's why I believe that, I mean, this should be done in a, let's say, progressive way, and implementing plans together. As we said, it's not just about intervening with urban design, but about also investing in public transport, about understanding that people need to arrive to Barcelona to work, to commute back to their cities, and even inside of the city, how to move, no? But if we think now on the Eixample of Barcelona, which is now the core, the central part of Barcelona, there is, I mean, so many cars crossing the city from the center from one point to another, that this is also not viable for the future, no? So it is about finding this balance, but I think that now we need also to move forward with a step forward with this pedestrian infrastructure for sure, because the structure is not balanced. No? If we take also the plans from Salvador Rueda, no? Who was the visionary of this model, that well, he has clear axes and streets in which you could make work both cars, mobility, sustainable mobility, and pedestrian streets, no? And maybe, I mean, you could arrive to a balance between both systems.
Jose, you want to comment on this? Because I think while reducing cars and giving space back to people and nature is also something that maybe you would like to have.
No,
something.
absolutely. I believe I agree it's utopian to all of the sudden just to get rid of the cars. And sometimes I believe it's not utopian, because Pontevedra just showed us that, and Paris just showed us that. So all of a sudden they demonstrated that in less than a generation you can change people's patterns of behavior, and you can reduce 70% of the cars. Of course, that also leads to gentrification. Yes, indeed it does. But the thing is that it's harder to get rid of the cultural way way of I have a car, I want my car. It's also hard to get rid of the economical part. I cannot afford to live inside the city center, so we have to find ways of balance. But there is a huge room of improvement on the quality of the public space, and in particular, I believe that cities are now consolidated in Europe, so we don't really have space for bigger urban parks. But the space in between spaces is the most important. So working on the trajectory that people take from their house to the metro, from their house to the workplace. And one of the things that I learned from the Danes is that if I change my job, the first thing I should change is not my car, but my house. And that's something that I really loved. So I learned from them to always live next to the place where I work. And for me, it's amazing because I live in the city center of Porto. I'd rather have a small IKEA-size apartment than a large house outside. That's the cultural part that the Portuguese, it's hard for them. They'd rather live outside. I live in an IKEA shoebox house with my 3 kids, and I love it because I leave my house, I drop kids in school, I go to the university. On the way back, I pick the kids, I go to the supermarket, I leave them in soccer practice, and I go home. I would never give up on that life quality, but that's my decision. I cannot impose that decision to other people. So that's why we should have ways of redundancy. On the mobility side, there's another layer that we have to approach, which is worldwide. The biggest increase in traffic congestion, it's because of people, of course. On average, a citizen of Porto spends 1 hour and 40 minutes inside a car. That's too much. I would never do that. But the biggest increase is on the services. Uber Eats, people are getting lazier. They're ordering everything. Everything comes from abroad. So the biggest increase in demand in the cities is, of course, of these new ways of mobility. So that's also something that we should address, which is we should try to find ways to people to go to the supermarket and that cook at home again. So that's the cultural layer, which is one of the hardest ones to address.
I'd just like to add something. In considering the case of Porto, which is quite familiar, I think we still are designing for cars. And while if we keep on designing, considering that cars are the protagonists, it won't be possible to make the change. So I think we have to change. It must be progressive. And in some particular points, José also mentioned Pontevedra, which is a quite good example. Of course, it's a small town, so it's easier. But at the end, the topic was health. What the mayor wanted to introduce was more health to the children because they were getting fat and they had a lot of diseases related to lungs, I suppose. So in a way, I think you have to change the mindset, and I'm sure we've been discussing for 20 years that we have to, in the Portuguese case, that we have to reduce cars, but we keep on designing considering the primary solution for cars.
Let me just add something. In the case of Pontevedra, because they made the people-centric city, the birth rates exploded. Search for it. You'll be mesmerized on how many babies are now being born in Pontevedra because of this people-centric approach. I was mesmerized by it.
Okay, we will. Go ahead. We will. You want to add?
Maybe a small thing. To me, one of the most beautiful things that came out of this conversation is going from project to process. So how we can really think about what we do as a process. I think the one you're mentioning is also a clear process thing. And I don't think the solution will be the same everywhere. Like, some cities, we are doing designs in some cities, like Dubai, where people are still, super focused on the car. And at the same time, for me, it was a beautiful thing to see New York. 10 years ago, when the mayor said, when the mayor mentioned want to turn New York into a biking city, I say, oh my God, it's wonderful, but will it work? And it did work. Now you go to New York, and then a lot of people, it's not like Amsterdam or Copenhagen, but is very surprising. And so what I want to say is that we move from project, something like this is the project, this is the solution, to process. We build flexibility, and we allow people to decide. Then I think we got a solution. And I don't know, in Barcelona, maybe you're right, more cars, Maybe people will say, no, they want to turn Barcelona into the new Amsterdam. I don't know. So I think, I think process will help us that. And I think that to me I think is kind of the next key thing. The opposite of modernism was all about projects. I think if we can think about process, it's about ecology, it's about nature, it's about people being part of that.
As we have still 3 minutes because they offer, I think, or we are late, but just 3 minutes.
By the way, you cannot see it, but we were out of time, but somebody there added some minutes, so now we got 3 minutes, so yes.
So, related with the ideas that you have shared today for a better future for all, I would like to ask you, over the next 12 months, what will you be working on?
Removing cars.
Removing cars. Okay.
Removing cars. No, okay. No, it's a joke. Yeah. No, we are now quite working on the idea of how to refresh some of the most vulnerable spaces of cities in Barcelona. We are working together with schools and municipalities and introducing new strategies on how to use nature-based solutions, but also inclusion and other dimensions into this kind of small pilots for transforming and making environmentally much more comfortable those spaces for the future.
It's a secret.
Okay.
I will say. We need to start planning the cities for the extreme weather events. So the thing I'm going to be working on is the second study for Porto, which is how the city will behave in an extreme weather event. In this case, a massive rain, a massive flood. It's inspired by the Danish cloudburst. So basically what we'll need to do is to identify which streets need to act and behave as rivers, because what happens during a cloudburst, a massive weather event, is that in 10 minutes, all of the stormwater city gets clogged. So all of the underground systems that we make, they will stop working and the water will run on the surface. And if the water will run on the surface, let's design and decide where. What are the streets that should act as rivers, and where does that water goes to? Which areas of the city should be flooded in a safe and controlled way? Which areas of the city should be protected? And that's the next study that we're developing.
Well, I'll keep working on changing the mindset somehow of the students, of the people we work with, and creating opportunities to introduce some different approaches to these matters, considering this idea that Carlo, I think it was very interesting, that in fact we are not considering or the importance of solutions. They are not so important, but the process to get there is really the thing that matters.
Mm-hmm.
Should I answer that as well?
Yes.
Well, actually, the Biennale was a bit more heavy. It was, was quite intense. So maybe my project will also be to take some time off. But in terms of things related to the Biennale about, how we can use different types of intelligence to focus on the biggest challenge today, what we've been hearing a lot about adaptation, adapting to a changing climate and a changing planet. We just designed, it's out with Howler Yun, a plaza that will be the centerpiece of COP30 in Belém, in the Amazon, and they will stay as a cultural space in the Amazon. The point there is how to create a plaza floating on water, moving like a submarine up and down with the water level, as a way to, as a place for discussion, as a place for convenience, a place for gathering. So that's a project we'll present in November in Belém, and then we'll keep on living in the Amazon. And then the most crazy things that we are starting to be engaged, they're just the beginning, but I'll share them. One is a project in Antarctica. And the project in Antarctica is to store ice from all the glaciers that are disappearing. Ice have millions of years on the planet, and that history is dying because glaciers are disappearing. In South America, Venezuela was the first country actually to lose fully glaciers. According to projections, all of the glaciers in Europe might be gone by 2100. I mean, I love going to the mountains. If you go every year, it's so sad. You see really, every year you see the difference in glaciers, how they're retreating. And so this project in Antarctica is actually to store some of this memory in this space in Antarctica. We know that Antarctica will last, hopefully still for a while, for a long time, and it's a good way to store this. Or another thing is that when you think about adaptation, we're just starting to work on it and to look at that, is the Aral Lake. The Aral Lake is one of the biggest tragedies of the 20th century, as you might know. It's one of the most polluted areas on the planet. It's a lake that disappeared. It was an inward sea, basically a sea where the water was coming and then it was evaporating, but basically you had this kind of lake or sea. Because of what happened in the late Soviet Union, it ended up as one of the probably the biggest environmental disaster on the planet in the past century. So what to do there, how architecture can help us to fix that? Well, it's almost like in small scale, the challenge we got on the planet at a big scale with climate change. So if we're able, if as architects we can do something for Aral, then maybe we can learn something about what can be done on the scale of the planet. So those are two of the things that where we, I hope that architecture can help a bit. And if anybody is interested, do let me know. And we love collaboration, so that we can work together.
Oh, great. So, and a final note. In the very early days of this week, when this powerful international leader continues to deny the reality of climate change, here are 4 specialists who respond to evidence, engaging with the challenge at hand, and treat cities as living systems capable of helping to restore, integrate, and reach the ecosystems that surround them. That, I think, is the spirit of shift. So thank you to Casa da Arquitectura once again. Thank you to José Pedro Sousa, to our speakers, Hati, Santiago Lameres, and colleagues with surnames is easier. And to all of you for being with us. Thank you.
Para fazer o encerramento desta jornada de trabalho, chamamos ao palco o curador da 3ª edição do Shift, João Pedro Sousa.
Muito bem. Estamos a chegar ao fim aqui desta edição do Shift. Tivemos aqui várias apresentações, não foram só 3, foram várias. Tivemos também 3 grandes discussões, muito vibrantes, complementares, provocadoras, e também, apesar de termos estado aqui a trabalhar a 3 escalas, os materiais, os edifícios, as cidades, acho que em vários aspectos elas tocaram-se e complementam-se bem. Enfim, não queria demorar muito tempo, mas gostaria, se calhar, de tentar aqui fazer um exercício de recuperar aqui algumas ideias que foram aqui debatidas, que me parecem relevantes de sublinhar. Na primeira sessão dos materiais, tivemos aqui, através da Suzanne Bronson, aqui uma viagem ao Báltico, não é? Onde se mostrou aqui uma dimensão muito próxima entre investigação e prática, uma prática local, com atenção aos materiais da região. Fez-me lembrar aqui um bocadinho até aquelas ideias daquele teórico do Reinhard Bannon, que falava da arquitetura antiga, ou melhor, dos espaços mais ancestrais, onde era o fogo e era a temperatura que definia um bocadinho a organização do espaço e não o teto e a parede, e portanto eram estas propriedades mais invisíveis, não é, que comandavam a arquitetura. De certa maneira, a Suzanne, quando falou destas abordagens, não falou em países, não falou em condições centralizadas, mas na verdade era a região do Báltico, a região do clima, o clima específico que existia nessa região, os materiais, e portanto são outros valores que se calhar definem aqui as fronteiras de como devemos atuar em cada um destes espaços. E a conversa também evoluiu para diferentes abordagens aqui aos materiais, desde a reutilização. Foi interessante a Cláudia falar desta ideia do material à partida ser algo sem forma, algo sem função, E, na verdade, quando falamos em reutilização, estamos não a falar de um material, mas já de um produto, não é? Um produto que foi concebido com uma determinada função e agora temos que encontrar ou dar-lhe uma nova vida para voltar a integrá-lo no ciclo de vida e, portanto, esta reflexão também foi aqui bastante falada e dissecada. No meio da discussão também se levantaram aqui algumas ambiguidades, ou melhor, algumas tonalidades, as coisas não são em preto nem em branco. Foi interessante falarmos, por um lado, do interesse desta abordagem mais local, mais específica, mas ao mesmo tempo também surgiu a questão, mas como é que nós podemos escalar, não é, estas soluções para abordar a crise e os problemas que encontramos, por exemplo, nas cidades. E das respostas percebemos que se calhar estas coisas podem se intersetar e que precisamos, na verdade, da sensibilidade e também das oportunidades tecnológicas, quer de uma, quer de outra abordagem. Em resumo, como disse também a Cristina, não é? Precisamos aqui de uma nova mirada, foi assim que ela falou. O conhecimento existe de uma forma fragmentada, mas a cadeia, não é? A cadeia que permite fechar este ciclo, este loop, parece que não está ainda resolvida. Daí, nestas abordagens dos bancos de materiais, de ver como é que podemos aproveitar e demolir ou desmantelar os edifícios. Portanto, o conhecimento existe, está fragmentado, mas temos que ver como é que podemos articulá-lo num círculo contínuo. E perante isto, não é? E perante até a ideia de que regulamentos, de que legislação nos poderão estar aqui a limitar enquanto arquitetos, o Ignácio deixou aqui uma provocação, não é? Que se calhar o problema não é isso, se calhar somos nós arquitetos que podemos estar aqui a perder alguma capacidade de desenhar com qualidade, porque desde sempre fomos capazes de olhar para os constrangimentos, para os materiais, seja na Revolução Industrial, não é? Quando passou a ser, digamos, quase que fomos forçados, não é? Ou conduzidos a utilizar materiais todos iguais, de repente descobrimos novas tipologias, não é? Descobrimos novas formas de construir pavilhões das feiras universais, vãos enormes que não poderíamos fazer de uma outra forma e, portanto, esta capacidade de olhar para as condições, não é? De frente, com honestidade, com franqueza, e a partir daí a nossa criatividade vir ao de cima e poder projetar, enfim, uma nova arquitetura, se quisermos dizer assim de uma forma mais inspiradora, está aqui chamado ao centro da questão, não é? Não é pôr os problemas nas outras dimensões. Certamente há muito por resolver, mas não nos podemos escusar a assumir também nós, enquanto profissionais, enquanto pessoas que temos a capacidade, né, de unir a técnica, unir a criatividade, olhar para as condições específicas, imaginar o futuro e dar respostas, né, que precisamos hoje em dia. Depois passamos para outra escala, né, para os edifícios, e passamos para a ação. Tivemos aqui esta apresentação do João em grande velocidade, aqui um pragmatismo utópico. Acho que esta duplo termo funciona muito bem, porque acho que não podemos, da conversa que sucedeu, percebemos que e a Ana Cabrita mencionou isso também por várias vezes, não é? É preciso pensar fora da caixa, não podemos desistir da criatividade, de pensar estas soluções, de ter um espírito crítico, mesmo que isso nos leve a enfrentar o cliente, a enfrentar outras entidades e a tentar até, em algumas situações, quase que, enfim, não gosto muito da palavra, mas educar, não é? Ajudar a mudar aqui um bocadinho a cultura ou a maneira como os dados do problema no início do projeto são vistos. E isto é um talento também, uma competência que nós, enquanto arquitetos, temos, não é? E temos que a exercer. E a discussão foi depois então evoluindo, não é? Evoluindo à volta da sustentabilidade como algo hoje já bastante estabelecido, mesmo e sobretudo até num nível mais corporativo destas entidades ligadas ao imobiliário, aos fundos. Como disse a Ana, é um must-have, portanto não está em questão não olhar para isso. Agora, obviamente, estes desafios trazem-nos aqui outros stakeholders para o primeiro plano, não é? Falou-se aqui das empresas de seguros, falou-se dos bancos, portanto, outras entidades que vêm aqui, no fundo, apertar um pouco o nosso território onde nós intervimos e, no fundo, vem complicar ou complexificar um bocadinho mais o terreno e as regras do jogo. E tentando compreender isso e perceber como podemos dar resposta, veio ao de cima algumas fragilidades ao nível da educação, ao nível do ensino, eventualmente aqui, enfim, não ser ainda um agente capaz de ajudar a consciencializar e a treinar, né, os futuros arquitetos a poderem entrar neste terreno e serem agentes não condicionados, mas agentes que possam ajudar a liderar um pouco esta discussão em prol da arquitetura e daquilo que a arquitetura tem capacidade de e deve transformar. Também foi interessante no final levantar-se aqui a provocação, não é? Olhamos muito para as leis de uma forma às vezes de desconfiança e até como algo que só vem aqui atrapalhar, mas foi dada aqui uma visão das leis como fatores que podem ser incentivos para a própria mudança, até para nos apertar um bocadinho mais a transformar com maior rapidez. Isso aconteceu, por exemplo, nos países nórdicos, com a adoção de algumas tecnologias. E portanto, enfim, esta mudança, esta viragem positiva não se faz sozinho pelos arquitetos ou pelos reguladores, ou pelos engenheiros, ou pelos construtores, ou pelos clientes. Realmente é cadeia como um todo que tem que avançar, que tem que comunicar e que tem que funcionar de uma forma circular. Finalmente, passamos para outra escala, né, para as cidades. Esta é uma escala engraçada porque quando falamos de cidades, e foi aqui referido por várias vezes, parece que falamos de organismos vivos, não é? E ao falar de organismos vivos e ao falar aqui deste tema da regeneração, quase que é aqui um bocadinho provocador, porque parece que se nós não regenerarmos ou se não trabalharmos no sentido positivo, não é, as nossas cidades, a natureza vai tratar de regenerar isso por si e, portanto, daí assistirmos a estes fenómenos extremos climáticos e é um pouco nesta dupla ação, né, de regeneração, quer do lado da natureza, não é, quer do nosso, que nos estamos aqui a mover e da qual nascem ideias muito inspiradoras de olhar para a cidade, ideias dinâmicas, ideias que contam com o tempo. A conversa não começou por aí, começou pela informação, pelo data, porque realmente hoje a informação digital é uma parte indissociável de quase todos os aspectos da nossa vida e até do nosso próprio ser individual. E por isso nas cidades, não é, não poderia ser de outra forma, não é? A informação é um lado, é um layer inseparável, cada vez mais, do tecido físico, do tecido das cidades. Hoje, para nos movermos na cidade, já não importa muito onde é que está a torre e o enfiamento da rua, vamos pelo GPS, não é? Isso só mostra o quão decisivo é a informação para nós nos situarmos e agirmos no território urbano. E dissecamos um pouco esta parte mais tecnológica. Foi um bocadinho diferente do arranque das outras sessões, mas foi importante ouvir e enfrentar um pouco esta realidade, não é? Que é mesmo uma realidade, se calhar um bocadinho invisível, não é? Porque estamos a falar de informação, mas é uma realidade. E tal como o digital é invisível, outras coisas são invisíveis. E o José falou, e a Teresa, não é? de outros circuitos, como o da água, que passam debaixo de nós e que, se nós não os considerarmos, se nós não os entendermos, se não desenharmos e projetarmos com esses ciclos, não é? Com essas dinâmicas invisíveis, sofreremos consequências, não é? E daí também outro aspecto interessante a conectar estas duas dimensões foi esta ideia, não é, do que eu achei muito curiosa, da informação, que eventualmente podemos olhar para ela, e foi aqui levantado um pouco isso, não é? Se não haveria aqui alguns riscos ligados à informação digital, ao data, mas ao mesmo tempo foi aqui aventada a ideia de que a informação é um complemento muito interessante para nós, projetistas e criadores, porque pode-nos balançar um certo viés que nós temos perante o projeto, algumas intuições pré-concebidas e que de repente, quando realmente de uma forma se calhar mais científica as mapeamos, as visualizamos, somos surpreendidos pelas coisas funcionarem um bocadinho de uma forma diferente daquilo que estamos a pensar à partida. E esta é uma mudança que acho que é importante salientar e que vemos também nas outras escalas e que se deve refletir também na educação, não é? Que é olharmos para a tecnologia como um aliado, como um complemento, como um parceiro, cada vez mais, não é? Um parceiro cada vez mais inteligente e artificial, mas que de facto temos que trabalhar de mãos dadas com essas oportunidades, não é? Que nos servem de espelho muitas vezes para percebermos se aquilo que estamos a ver é a forma mais, enfim, correta ou melhor para enfrentar os nossos problemas. Da informação passamos para outro layer, não é? Cidade de camadas, o layer social. Foi também aqui curioso, não é? Perceber aqui que a informação tem, enfim, desenvolver apenas o projeto baseado em informação tem os seus limites e que de facto a apropriação dos espaços acaba por depois ser o teste final e que nos mostra muitas vezes realidades que não podem ser antecipadas. E o Joaquim falou dos superblocos, da Carreira Santo António, em que de repente fazemos um projeto tão bom que depois acaba por promover gentrificação, os preços sobem e de repente aquela ideia do direito à cidade, de recentrar o cidadão novamente numa via que passa a ser pedonal, de repente pode abrir outro nível de dificuldade de acesso e, portanto, isto é realmente um organismo vivo, difícil, onde temos que procurar estes equilíbrios e de os balançar. Depois, daqui também, tanto da informação, passamos para o social e depois também passamos aqui para o cultural. Entrou na conversa mais uma vez o tema da educação, o tema das escolas, o trabalho que a Teresa tem feito, mostrando, né, que a universidade pode ser um parceiro também dos agentes que estão na realidade a mudar o território e as cidades, criando-lhes aqui a oportunidade de trabalhar numa outra condição onde podem experimentar, podem testar, podem ver ideias que se calhar não são execuíveis no imediato, mas que fazem pensar e fervilhar se calhar aqui outras ideias para um futuro se poderem aplicar. Isto tem acontecido bastante. Não só o José também mostrou ali rapidamente ali umas imagens também de um outro workshop e portanto este acho que de facto é um papel que as universidades têm que ter, não é só propriamente esta formação, como é que devemos formar os estudantes, mas também aproximar ao mundo real, interagir com estes diferentes agentes para em conjunto se poder afinar e testar abordagens para temas tão complexos e tão decisíveis como esta à escala da cidade. E mais duas considerações ainda sobre este tema. Esta ideia de que, quando se falou aqui do carro e do cidadão, de que eventualmente com alguma força se poderão induzir à mudança de padrões de utilização, tendo que esperar algum tempo, esta ideia mostra que de facto é preciso ter aqui coragem, não é? É preciso ter aqui uma visão e fixarmos, não é, com coragem para passar o tempo a essa ideia, não é, audaciosa, arrojadora, para poder realmente induzir a isso. Não podemos, como acontece aqui, cada vez que muda um governo, muda outra vez a política toda, como é que nós podemos inverter essa fragilidade de visões, não é, até de alguma utopia que é essencial. E, por fim, foi curioso o Carlo Ratti quase que fazer uma ponte com a primeira sessão dos materiais, não é? E também foi referido depois nos edifícios, esta ideia que mesmo também à escala da cidade, as soluções não têm que ser as mesmas em todo o lado, não é? Portanto, há contextos onde se calhar podemos avançar e conseguimos avançar e temos resultados positivos, avançar para a pedestrialização dos espaços, se calhar outras não, a circulação automóvel, o atravessamento da cidade tem que ser pensado e equacionado e está no centro das decisões e, portanto, quer nos materiais, quer nos edifícios, quer na cidade, esta ideia de que, sim, vivemos aqui um desafio comum, vivemos um problema que é global, mas temos que o pensar mais localmente com os instrumentos que temos, que não são só instrumentos de regulação, não são só instrumentos tecnológicos, mas são também, e vimos aqui várias maneiras de o abordar, são também as pessoas, digamos, do próprio contexto, que podem fazer parte, não é, da solução. Fim desta rápida, enfim, viagem pelas 3 sessões. Gostava só de dizer que, de facto, nós, perante estes desafios que temos aqui, muitas vezes, e agora falando aqui um bocadinho enquanto arquiteto, muitas vezes queixamos-nos, né, da nossa profissão, de que não é suficientemente reconhecida, de que temos honorários que não merecemos, que devíamos ser mais valorizados. E eu acho que, de facto, nós temos aqui, não é, perante estes desafios, não é, e estas crises que enfrentamos, temos realmente aqui uma oportunidade de afirmar o valor, não é, que a nossa profissão, arquitetos, e estendendo agora ao resto do setor também da construção, tem para dar resposta a estes desafios que impactam o cidadão, não é? Impactam, nós sentimos o efeito destes fenómenos extremos, sentimos o efeito da circulação automóvel nas cidades, sentimos o efeito da poluição. Portanto, nós temos aqui um caminho, não é? Uma oportunidade de poder valorizar a nossa profissão, mas para isso é preciso, desde as escolas, desde a formação, caminhar nesse sentido, não esquecer a tecnologia, não esquecer a relação com a realidade, não é? O ambiente académico, o ambiente real, não esquecer isso, porque senão vamos perdendo território de intervenção, vamos perdendo capacidade de afirmação para outras forças, não é? de poder, e acho que todos aqui vimos, não é? Nestes projetos que foram aqui discutidos, realmente a força, não é? Que a imaginação e a capacidade depois de materializar que os arquitetos, os engenheiros, os construtores têm para mudar positivamente o nosso território. Portanto, temos que nos manter aí. E acho que este evento, o seminário de hoje, foi muito inspirador para, a partir daqui, sabendo, não é? Já aqui, tendo aqui algumas ideias, não é? Não pararmos por aqui e não termos que esperar, não é? E passarmos aqui à ação. E é um pouco nesse sentido que amanhã continuaremos de uma forma um bocadinho mais prática com um workshop que o Adrian Kreslik vai orientar com os estudantes, e onde vamos tocar um pouco na apresentação da Suzanne Brosson, ou seja, vamos olhar um bocadinho aqui para o passado, para o vernacular, para pensar estas soluções do futuro. Este é um dos muitos caminhos que foram aqui discutidos. Portanto, tal como se vai passar amanhã, vamos todos, não é? Espero eu, em cada um dos nossos sítios, tratar também de passar a ação em colaboração e para de facto continuarmos ou tentarmos fazer realmente esta viragem positiva que necessitamos. Queria agradecer uma vez mais à Casa da Arquitectura esta visão e esta ousadia de realizar este ciclo, né, do shift. Shift foi uma palavra muito usada aqui ao longo da discussão, porque realmente é muito reveladora do que se pretende. E agradecer também aos moderadores, aos oradores e a todas as pessoas que decidiram esta sexta-feira vir até aqui ouvir e participar aqui nesta discussão. O meu muito obrigado.
Muito obrigada por terem estado connosco nesta terceira edição do Shift. Até para o ano.